Hello, everybody. It's Randy Ray, the literate Texan here at Driftwood Ranch, and it is Tag Tuesday. Today, I am answering questions for a tag that I was tagged in from books I'm not reading, and it is the Shakespeare Journey Tag, and it is to celebrate Shake-Timber, an event during September where we read Shakespeare plays and other books about Shakespeare. I believe the three plays that are recommended for this year are Romeo and Juliet, Richard III, and Antony and Cleopatra. And I'm excited about this because Antony and Cleopatra is one of the Shakespeare plays I haven't read, and I like the other two and have seen them performed recently. Well, when I say recently, I mean within the last decade. Time changes that perspective, but I've seen them performed recently at the Dallas Shakespeare Festival. So there's a list of questions, and I'm supposed to answer them. So, I know. I was going to share a little anecdote first, though. Okay, so when I watched Kelly's video on books I'm not reading, she was listing off the people that she had tagged. And, I have a little bit of an ego, right? So, after she listed about 10 people, I thought, man, I bet she doesn't tag me. I should have been the first one she tagged, too. And then when she got to me, I was the next to the last person that she tagged. I think she tagged 15 or 20 people. But I literally did a fist pump and said, yeah. So anyway, I was going to do the tag anyway. So number one, what was your first experience reading Shakespeare and what was it like? Okay, so actually reading Shakespeare, my first experience would have been with either Julius Caesar or Romeo and Juliet. I'm not sure which one of those came first. I believe that we read, no. We read Romeo and Juliet when I was in 8th grade. My reading teacher was a really sweet guy, and he's one of the only people I've met who's actually taller than I am. But he didn't exactly make a compelling case for Shakespeare or the play Romeo and Juliet. But we had two English classes when I was going to 8th grade. We had one that was reading, and the second one was grammar. And I think they called it language. Reading and language were the names of the courses then. I'm sure that's changed dramatically since then. But our teacher for the language class was a great lady. I'm still friends with her. And we still discuss books occasionally via text. And we've watched a lot of really cool movies, both together and separately. But she had a degree in theater. And so she explained Romeo and Juliet to us in a way that made it come alive. I can still remember her explaining the character of Mercutio and how he was a character who just loved talking so much that when he couldn't think of words, he would just go blah, blah, blah. And also she explained, they're young people, and Romeo's the kind of guy who's gone from one woman to another woman to another woman, and he's always brokenhearted. He's either fallen in love or he's brokenhearted. That's just the way he lives his life. And so that really started to make it come alive, and I thought, well, maybe Shakespeare's for me. This was before I had designs on majoring in English in college. At the time, I thought I wanted to be a science teacher, but I grew out of that. I also grew out of wanting to be a teacher, too, but that's a whole different story. But that was my first experience. I believe we read Julius Caesar in high school, which is good, but I also think that maybe Julius Caesar is taught in high school because it's one of the only Shakespeare plays without a lot of sex in it. Number two, has the reading of a Shakespeare play ever brought you to tears? No. It's really rare that reading a book brings me to tears. Watching a movie, that's one thing. My daughters like to make fun of me, in fact, for crying during movies. But reading Shakespeare has never really brought me to tears that I can recall. Although I did take a girlfriend of mine to see Romeo and Juliet at the Dallas Shakespeare Festival a few years ago, and she cried and cried at Romeo and Juliet. I think that might have had to do with the bottle of Merlot that she drank too. What scene was it, and where were you when it happened? Okay, doesn't apply since I haven't cried at the reading of a Shakespeare play. Number three, are there any people that have played a significant role in your Shakespeare journey? Yes, my 8th grade language teacher, obviously. Also, I took Shakespeare in college as part of getting my English degree. So Dr. Wright was my English professor. May he rest in peace. But he also played a significant role in my Shakespeare journey. The number of very generous women who have gone out on dates with me to see the Dallas Shakespeare Festival, Shakespeare in the Park out here, have all played a significant role, some of them more significant than others. My friend Amos has also played a significant role in my Shakespeare journey because he's read as many of the plays as I have, understands them better than I have. Also, my friend Will down in Houston, really, really good friend of mine who teaches school. He's working on his PhD. Another one who's a really, really big fan of William Shakespeare. My friend Tom loves Shakespeare with a passion, and he's part of the debate between the Stratfordians and the rest of them, but mostly the Oxfordians, which is funny because I also have a friend, Cliff, who up until recently was a pretty devout Oxfordian. So there's been a lot of people. That's one of the things about Shakespeare is that it's fun, and when you start dipping your toes into that water, if you're not into Shakespeare already, you will find other people who are into Shakespeare too. Number 4, do you have a favorite book or film about Shakespeare? I'm a big fan of The Friendly Shakespeare by Nori Epstein, I think is the name. That's a terrific book, especially if you're new to Shakespeare. It'll help you get enthusiastic about it and realize that Shakespeare is supposed to be fun. It's not supposed to be drudgery at all. Also, I've really been enjoying Upstart Crow, which is a sitcom that stars William Shakespeare as the main character. It's terribly funny, and if you know a lot about the Shakespeare films, I'm probably the only person in the world who did not like the book Hamlet. And that was ostensibly about Shakespeare, but he's even more of a cipher at the end of that book than he was before. There's something else I'm thinking of. There was a great novel called The Weird Sisters. I don't remember the name of the author, but it's about 3 women who are actually sisters whose father is a Shakespeare professor. The entire family quotes Shakespeare at each other during arguments. And they quote Shakespeare at each other when they're not having arguments too. But it was a wonderful, charming little novel. So yeah, there's plenty of books and films about Shakespeare that I think everybody should take advantage of. Even Shakespeare in Love is a lot of fun if you've got the right attitude about it. Me and Orson Welles isn't necessarily about Shakespeare, but it is about the production of, which one was it? I think it was Macbeth that Orson Welles put on. And I'm a huge Orson Welles fan. So the guy who plays Orson Welles in that movie is amazing. I believe the actor's name is Christian McKay, but I could be mistaken about the first or the last name, or both, because of course, I'm not quite right. So, number 5, which character in Shakespeare most resembles you and in what ways? I would suggest that I resemble a character in a Shakespeare play, and that character would be Falstaff, because he's big and fat and cowardly, brilliant and witty. And that describes me pretty much, although I don't know how cowardly I am, but I'm also not nearly as witty, so it's okay. But if there were a character that I was born to play in Shakespeare, it would almost certainly be Falstaff, who, a lot of people would say is one of Shakespeare's greatest characters. Certainly right up there with Hamlet as a great character, although you don't hear people talking about Falstaff as much as you do hear them talking about Hamlet. But I was really lucky too, and it's been a couple decades ago now, they did all the Falstaff plays one year at Shakespeare in the Park in Dallas. And that was really cool. And the guy playing Falstaff was excellent. Number 6, which play would you most like to see performed in a theater and why? This is going to be a weird answer. Titus Andronicus is one that I would like to see performed in a theater because it's not like other Shakespeare plays. It's a little bit more of a B movie approach to Shakespeare, or his approach to a B movie. It's really just a lot of shocking violence, and it's really gruesome. And the movie Titus, if you haven't seen it, you really should. It's really wonderful. So, but I'd like to see how somebody did that in the theater. If I could go back and relive a theater experience, I went to see A Midsummer Night's Dream at the Dallas Theater Center. They performed it at Shakespeare in the Round. They heavily emphasized the sexual innuendo of it. Bottom wears a leather donkey mask with lots of zippers. All the fairies are dressed in lingerie, but it was a beautiful production, and I really enjoyed it. So if I could relive a theater experience from the past, that would be the one, because it was great. I know that wasn't the question, but I'm going to say what I want. You know me. Number 7. What actor throughout history would you most like to have seen play Hamlet while in his prime? Well, my favorite actor of all time is Paul Newman. And I think Paul Newman would have done a fine job playing Hamlet. Now, that's not to say that he didn't play Hamlet. He might have. I didn't look it up before I made this video. But if he did play Hamlet, I'd sure like to see it. That's just off the top of my head, but I can't think of anything that I would have liked better. Okay. Number 8. Deliver your favorite speech or soliloquy from a Shakespeare play. That's a tough one. I might have to do that in a whole separate video, okay? Number 9, do any of Shakespeare's plays intimidate you? If yes, what play and why? No, none of Shakespeare's plays intimidate me anymore. And I'll tell you why, because they're not intimidating. They're intimidating at first because the language is so different. Yes, it's still written in modern English, but it's Shakespearean English. It was 500 years ago. So, 5 centuries ago, the language was different. And developing an ear for that takes a little bit of time, which is one of the reasons that I suggest if you're a complete beginner to Shakespeare, start by watching some of the bigger movies that star familiar faces and just kind of relax into it and understand that you're not going to understand everything that's going on, but just pick up what you can. And while you're doing that, just relax, because your brain is developing an ear for that language. Try to understand it, but don't try so hard that you're not enjoying what's going on the screen, because the directors of these movies, for the most part, if they're doing any kind of good job at all, know that the language is antiquated, and they're going to make sure that you understand the plot as well as possible via the images shown on the screen. And how well they do that is a reflection of how good a director they are. Also, it helps to have good actors. Number 10, what tips would you give to intimidated readers coming to Shakespeare for the first time? Well, I just gave them. I'm actually planning a whole video of tips for Shakespeare first timers, so I'm going to save a little content for that. But I am going to suggest one tip, and this is an easy one. Most of Shakespeare's plays are written in verse. They're poems. They're long poems, but they're poems nonetheless. And poetry is meant to be read aloud. That's what separates poetry from prose, is that poetry is poetry because of how it sounds. And even if you're sub-vocalizing, you're not quite getting how it sounds unless you're hearing it out loud. So when you're reading a Shakespeare play, you should read it out loud to yourself. And don't be afraid to use different voices for different characters to keep them straight in your mind. And you can be as silly about this as you want. In fact, the sillier you are about the voices you create for the characters, the more likely you are to remember what it is that you're reading. It'll keep you engaged. Number 11, which is your favorite Shakespeare play and why? I've already talked about this, but Henry IV Part 1 is probably my favorite Shakespeare play. The interactions between Falstaff and Hal, are what make the play for me. And then, of course, Henry IV Parts 1 and 2 and Henry V, they make up a sequence. And so really, you could almost consider them all one play. But those are my favorites. But it's really hard to choose a favorite when you're talking about the greatest stuff ever written too, because it's all terrific, every bit of it. So those are my answers to all of the questions for the Shakespeare Journey tag, except for number 8, where I'm supposed to deliver my favorite speech or soliloquy from a Shakespeare play. And I promise I'll do that in an upcoming video. And number 10, which I answered partially, but I have a whole video planned on it. What tips would you give to intimidated readers coming to Shakespeare for the first time? Which is going to be a whole video unto itself that I've actually been planning for the last 4 or 5 months and just haven't gotten to yet. But now is the best time possible because there's an actual Shakespeare reading event going on. So that's it. I enjoyed making this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it. Stay hydrated, and I will see you again soon.